And we want to hear from you. Send me a tweet about the show. That's at Howard Kurtz. We'll read the best ones at the end of the program. With the House and Senate now firmly heading toward closing down the government here in Washington, the coverage has been as chaotic and as polarized as I've ever seen it. Left-wingers are slamming right-wingers, and conservative commentators are attacking each other over the Republican tactics that have again brought us to the brink of an impasse over Obamacare and government spending. And everyone has strong opinions on the freshman senator whose 21 hours of speechifying put him squarely in the harsh media spotlight, Ted Cruz.
This is a brilliant move by Cruz because he's trying to take over the Republican Party. He's trying to take over the conservative wing.
Who or what has the nerve, the person or the party, to put this Princeton cowboy in his place?
I mean, the responsible Republicans realize that a government shutdown would be disastrous politically, would be disastrous practically, and doesn't really have any upside for them.
But has the media circus obscured the crucial issues at stake here? Joining us now, Lauren Ashburn, Fox News contributor and a former managing editor of USA Today. Jim Garrity, contributing editor at National Review. And Kirsten Powers, a Fox News contributor and columnist for The Daily Beast. Lauren Ashburn, we're at the brink of a government shutdown. It looks almost definite that's going to happen. And yet much of the coverage is focused on the sort of Beltway media circus and Ted Cruz.
The impact on premiums, deductibles, jobs, subsidies, exchanges, the definition of the federal poverty level, all have been eclipsed by the spectacle on the floor of Senator Ted Cruz reading Dr. Seuss's Green Eggs and Ham and reading a whole bunch of other things. And the tenor of the coverage of this last week has been much lighter. Take this GQ October issue, for example. Ted Cruz, the distinguished wacko bird from Texas. In it, they go on to say how John McCain talks about him as a wacko bird. And he defends himself by saying, hey, he bestowed this moniker on me. And if fighting to turn around the out-of-control spending and debt is being a wacko bird, I guess I am.
I bumped into Senator Cruz a few minutes before coming into the studio here. He's not exactly been staying off the television circuit. And he said to me that Jon Stewart and Stephen Colbert had made fun of him this week, that he thought they were very funny, and that he liked being on those Comedy Central shows because they also played clips of him attacking Obamacare. So this is a guy who is welcoming this often harsh media spotlight.
Yeah, there's a very strange, ironic component to the coverage of Cruz, which is, I think Lauren's point is completely true, that all the other kinds of coverage of actually what Obamacare is going to do, the good parts and the bad parts, much more complicated, much harder. You have to go out and actually interview people. Finding people to bash Ted Cruz, that's very easy to find in this town. So you end up with this, oh, Howard, isn't it terrible the way Ted Cruz thinks this is all about him? Let's talk more about Ted Cruz.
But in fact, Jim says it's very easy to find people to bash the senator from Texas, including Charles Krauthammer, Joe Scarborough, and many conservative commentators on his side of the aisle. And isn't that making it easier for the mainstream media to make Cruz the issue and to join in the general aura of criticism?
Well, I'll have to disagree a little bit with the idea that the media hasn't covered the different facets of Obamacare. I think you have health care policy people who do cover that, and frankly, it's kind of boring, and I don't think it gets a lot of maybe the sexy media attention. You know, I'm fascinated by it.
Millions of Americans.
Yes, I'm fascinated by it, but it's not it doesn't get the sort of sexy media attention. And look, Ted Cruz is the news because he's the one that is being credited by the Tea Party caucus, or what Charles Krauthammer I think called the insane caucus. You know, they're the ones that are basically going to cause the government to shut down, right?
See, Jim, when Kirsten can approvingly quote Krauthammer, then she's got extra ammunition.
But, notice how contradictory the criticisms are. Howard, what's a Princeton cowboy? from Chris Matthews there? Because I thought Princeton was all about dignified and higher education.
But,
it's about the Tigers.
In the defense, you're right, Kirsten. In defense, the New York Times had a piece by Robert Pear talking about how companies will restrict the number of providers that you can have. USA Today.
If you sign up for these Obamacare insurance exchanges,
right? And USA Today, my former employer, also had an interesting piece about how 500,000 children may not be covered under Obamacare.
On that point, the day earlier this week when the administration announced exactly what the premiums would be in various states, depending on whether you're a family of four or an individual, and I understand those numbers can be disputed, but the only outlet I thought saw giving that real prominence was New York Times, which put it on the front page, and at the same time, everyone else was, I shouldn't say they didn't cover it, of course it was covered, but much more wrapped up in what I would call the circus. And you're basically saying, look, what do you expect? That's more interesting to cover.
Well, I think one of the problems with Obamacare is the exchanges have not launched yet. So everything is speculation. And even what we're finding, and there's now Matt Iglesias did an article about this, that they're finding that the cost is actually lower than CBO projected because it's a marketplace, right? So things are starting to move. So we don't really know what's going to happen. And I would hope that as it rolls out, that we're going to have some real serious coverage of how it's affecting people.
The good news, when they try to describe these exchanges, they say, well, here's what it's likely to be like for someone who's a married couple, married of two, and all that stuff. The problem is that example very rarely matches the reader. You know what I'm saying? That notice one example of a single person living in this place, because it's geographically distributed, because marital status changes, because whether or not you have kids changes, whether or not you smoke changes. There's so many variables. It's hard for people to say, well, here's how it's going to affect your prices, because there's so many different variables.
I want to go to a soundbite, but don't take my word for it. I just happened to see a survey by the Kaiser Family Foundation. 56% of those questions said that the coverage, in their view, has mostly been about politics and controversies. Only 6% said it was mostly about how the law might impact people. About half said they didn't trust any media source on this. 10% said they trusted Fox, 5% said they trusted CNN, 2% said they trusted MSNBC. So since we're talking about Ted Cruz, like many other programs on television, he gave an interview, I should say, with Rush Limbaugh, which he took issue with the press coverage. Let's take a listen.
What is utterly maddening about all of these reporters is, what do they write about all day long? They write about the process, they write about the horse race, they write about this personality or the other. They act like they're Hollywood gossip columnists.
Gossip columnist. Now, when I spoke to Senator Cruz, he said to me these unfortunate personal attacks, and a lot of them have been anonymous, unnamed GOP aides, which I think is just not necessary. But he said it distracts from what really matters, the substance of Obamacare, and I don't think it's accidental, says Ted Cruz, that reporters are going in that direction. And
I don't think it's accidental that Ted Cruz is going in that direction. I think that we also have to keep in mind that this is someone who will be running for president in 2016.
According to a new poll, he's now the Republican frontrunner after 9 months in office. 20% PPP poll over Rand Paul. But so you're saying that Ted Cruz he wants this coverage, he's making it about him, and every time he's interviewed, he says, no, it's not about me, it's about the issue.
This is a guy who spent how many, 21 hours standing there? Does he have a family?
Could not in a box.
I would not, could not say if I am.
Yes, he has a family.
Yes, he has a family, and he's hitting all of the Sunday shows, and he is out there, wants to be out there, and as Kirsten pointed out, is becoming the face of this.
I think if you ask most people, what did Ted Cruz say during that filibuster? The number one answer would be, oh, green eggs and ham. It was a very cute moment where he's reading from the storybook to his daughters watching at home. Very cute, wonderful. However, he talked for 21 some other hours with much more substantive criticism of Obamacare and why he's willing to risk a government shutdown and why this is so important. But we're going to skip over all that because it sounds kind of silly when a guy's talking, Dr. Seuss from the South floor of the Senate.
The reason that got a lot of critical, skeptical, negative coverage, in part from conservatives, is not so much what he said during the 21 hours, but the fact that it was seen as a stunt because in the end he was not going to stop the bill, and in fact he got only 18 other Republican senators to join him on the key procedural vote, and then he ended up voting for the bill. So there is this disconnect between Senator Cruz saying, I don't want this to be about me, I want this to be about the issue, and becoming the leading face on Capitol Hill. He wants this to be about
him. I mean, he wants this to be about him. He is raising his profile. He is, tearing a page out of Rand Paul's book and, trying to get this same type of attention. I don't think that he did as good a job as Rand Paul did in that filibuster. I think that was a good filibuster and worthwhile. But he is raising his profile. He wants to be a leader and a face for the Republican Party.
Look at the difference in the tone of coverage of Cruz on this. And a lot of this, it's not exactly comparable. A lot of this has to do with the fact that the Republican Party is so split over Cruz's tactics. And another Texan, State Senator Wendy Davis, who led that filibuster against an abortion bill, which ultimately lost, but she had the support of her party, and she was made into a heroine by the media.
Yes, because by and large the media is pro-choice or supportive of abortion rights and saw her as a heroine for a cause they believed in. And as you said, he's a wacko. Most of the media sees him as a wacko bird or as a Princeton cowboy, whatever that is. That he begins this debate as a villain.
Title?
He did. He embraced it, and actually, in giving Jason Zengerle a tour of his office, showed him up on his bookshelf a picture of a hat with Daffy Duck on it and the words wacko bird. I mean, he is embracing this because it's catchy.
In the GQ piece, right. But you seem to be saying the media are doing this not because it's great theater, not because Cruz is a colorful character, but because journalists don't agree with Cruz. And
Yeah, he's a prepackaged villain for starters, and also it's a very simple story. You don't have to get into premiums. There's no numbers involved. It's Ted Cruz did this. What do you think of it?
Okay.
And you find a lot of people who say it's the worst thing ever.
President Obama has been out on the stump making the case against the Republicans, obviously, who he would love to blame for a government shutdown, which again looks likely to happen in the next 36 hours, and also took a swipe at his least favorite television networks. Take a look at that.
If you talk to somebody who said, well, I don't know, I was watching Fox News and they said this horrible, and you can say, you know what, don't take my word for it, go on the website.
Kirsten?
Look, I've been very critical of the president in the past when he's come after Fox News to delegitimize Fox News. They had this whole campaign that the White House was going to delegitimize Fox News. We're not real journalists. Very critical of that, and I think that's very chilling. This is just an off-the-cuff, funny line. It's not a. I don't feel like it's a real attack anymore.
It was a swipe, but was it warranted by the fact that
are there a lot of people here who don't like Obamacare? Yeah, there are. You know, I mean, it's not any different than a Republican complaining about the New York Times or something like that. It's just a laugh line.
You
I feel
let that
like.
stand?
No, I think MSNBC would have been the more analog equivalent of that. Look, I mean, this is, somewhere Anita Dunn is saying, yes, that's exactly what I wrote in that memo.
So now we're heading to what looks like a government shutdown. Who knows how long it will last? And I wonder how you think the media are going to cover this, and more importantly, do journalists kind of love these crises, even though this is a self-inflicted
crisis? Do you even
crisis?
have to ask this question?
Yeah.
I mean, you've been in this business for a long period of time. How did they cover last week? How will they cover that? I think we're going to see more of the coverage of the politics of it, not of the substance. I went online to try and figure this out for a friend of mine. I couldn't figure it out. I went to
figure out the details of premiums and Obamacare?
Right. And then I went into the media and tried to figure it out. You can't. So there aren't those explainers, but I could find a lot about the coverage of green eggs and ham.
But the one difference, which I've now got memorized, that the one difference is you will have stories about national parks shutting down, people not getting their checks, tourists being angry they can't go to the Washington Monument. You will have stories about the 800,000 federal workers who will immediately be furloughed and the contractors who aren't getting their paychecks. That makes it real, and that will change the nature of the story, and maybe will Republicans get blamed?
Oh, I can't see any scenario where the Republicans don't get blamed for this, and there are probably reporters on planes right now to red states all over the country to file stories about people not being able to get their government services, and it's going to become a localized story, and Republicans don't realize they're making a mistake.
Get to a break. Kirsten Powers, Jim Garrity, thanks very much.